Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMahon & Ransford, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultants Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMahon and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Welcome back to the Consultants Way podcast. Anthony Paluska, Dean McMahon, and today we are joined by Justin Manduke. Justin, welcome to the show.
Anthony, Dean, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Great. Excited to have you. So Justin, you're the VP of Professional Services at AuditBoard. You have lots of experience running and growing professional services teams within SaaS organizations. Provide a little bit of introduction of yourself, your background before we dive into the topic today.
Sounds good. So I've spent the better part of the last 15 years scaling post-sale organizations at growth stage SaaS companies. Spent 10 years at a customer experience management firm called Medallia, where I was one of the early professional services hires. Saw that company scale from 25 million through an IPO to about 450 million in recurring revenue. Went to lead the global professional services team at a fintech company called Blend for a couple of years and doubled the size of that team through their IPO. Was part of the leadership team of a company called Afresh, where I oversaw both implementations, customer support, and technical success. And I currently lead the professional services team at AuditBoard, the leading GRC SaaS platform in the world, where I have a team of 60 spanning across Europe and the United States.
All right. So you clearly understand growth and growing post-sales organizations, professional services organizations. The topic we want to cover today with you and your perspective on this is a term you've coined, the growth paradox. And want to talk about that. Introduce the topic if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about how this growth paradox impacts professional services organizations.
Sure thing. So as SaaS has grown up over the past 20, 30 years, I think you see a crop of leaders running teams today that have seen their way through different macroeconomic phases and scales of company growth. Pattern recognition starts to be there to the point where you see leaders that have seen early stage professional services and late stage mature public stage professional services teams. I think what you're seeing is that repetition is causing some leaders to focus on the maturity of a professional services team, what we're finding to be a little bit early in a company's growth phase. And so this idea of the paradox of growth is that what ultimately defines professional services maturity in SaaS might actually limit your ability to get there as fast as you want to. So the bravery to deprioritize some of those elements of ultimate maturity, I think, is a strategy that more professional services should at least start to have self-awareness of as they focus on what they want their org to become over time.
So take the term maturity, use it a couple of times there, and define what a mature organization looks like, what some characteristics are of that, and what maybe organizations are doing in terms of maturity. And then we'll talk about why they're doing that too early.
Good question. And I think that because we're going to focus a lot today on these like individual elements of PS maturity, let's not forget like the purpose of why professional services teams are here, which is to maximize ARR growth while not losing money. I think that a big cultural moment for a lot of teams is to understand that they are not a professional services firm. They are a professional services team at a software company, which comes with different priorities, different opportunities for investment for that outcome. And so when you think about ultimate services maturity, some define that by the margin profile that you have as a team, or things like time to value or individual KPIs. But at the end of the day, this is all about maximizing customer value, customer outcomes, the things that are important to SaaS companies like expansion and renewal and long-term relationships and value with customers. When you look at individual elements of professional services maturity, you can start to dissect financial maturity and operational maturity and retention and training and certification, the health and breadth of your partner network and the optionality that you have in delivering for customers. But all of these things, which ultimately become important, I would posit that can actually be anchors and hindrances to focusing on the right things in the right times.
Absolutely agree that and like many other evolutionary things as a company grows, you know what you want it to be 5 years from now, and we really want to use partners only, too early, right? Or utilization is our key driver, maybe never, right? Maybe never. But I will say, and I want your feedback on this, the capabilities that are inherent in PS, still agility, how to drive customer outcomes, how to bring the customer along with, how to talk to the customer, how to have client intimacy. Those are bedrock, and then we focus them on the right outcomes.
I think that that's right. You mentioned a few things there that I would refer to as ultimate maturity concepts, but also risks early on. But yes, Dean, I think no one's ever used utilization as a customer outcome. Clients don't wake up saying, I really wish my PS team was 70% utilized this week. Yeah. They're looking for outcomes. And partners are excellent. Partners can be a catalyst to your software growth, capabilities that you might not have that your customers want. But I think partners are also a magnifying glass on all of the vulnerabilities of your organization, how well you can enable your team and launch products and communicate internally. And all of those things, if not done well, can actually erode the incentive for partners to want to hitch their wagon to you to kind of catalyze your own growth and maturity and capability.
Yeah, and just to stay on partners, then we'll kick them to the corner, is they don't have the same objectives you do. No matter what, they may be aligned to you getting them into accounts, and they may be verbally aligned, but they have their own development problems. They have their own strategy. They have their own revenue problems, and they don't always drive our annual, revenue maximization. So,
partners come in different shapes and sizes, but if you think about partner firms that will hitch their wagon to your delivery SaaS business, they're looking at their 30% margin reliably, and so every time something is misscoped, every time you need to discount services to acquire a customer, which a software company would often be willing to do, the defensibility of all of those things, again, I believe can start to erode the viability of those partners coming to the table. When I was at Medallia, when we initially did and then didn't and did and didn't and did again focus on these partners, it was a maturity phase for us where we were looking at this as an opportunity to catalyze our growth, channel partnerships and implementation partnerships with partners of different kinds. But I think that what we also saw was that there were some fundamental and existential questions around the future of these partnerships. If we were focusing on self-service and delivering the same outcomes for customers with less services over time, and I'm talking mostly about implementation services, value-added services are a different story, then it raised the question of, what is the long-term viability of convincing this partner that they should train folks around our platform, that they can have a weekly and reliable, bench, some number of certified resources to drive that 30% margin. But if they stop getting projects because we're focused on the things that matter to us as a software company, these are the sorts of existential questions you just need clear-headedness around so you can set up these partnerships well. And I think it starts with first delivering well, right? This is all about predictability and delivery. I think only then can you focus on scaling, and then I think maintaining profit and degree of how much over time can change is the right linearity to how to think about maturity in services, whereas profitability might actually limit things like services investments that might be the right thing to do early on as you learn around how to deliver the same outcomes with less services over time.
Yeah, so maybe we take each of those different phases of maturity and break it down a little bit, and you can give us some guidance on, okay, if I'm an organization that's in the phase where I should be delivering well, what are the things that I ought to be focused on versus the things that I should ignore for now because that's a problem I need to deal with later. So let's maybe just start with that one and then move through those three phases you just talked through.
It's a great question, Anthony. And I'll use an example. All of these examples that I'll share today typically have happier endings than the problems I'm going to describe. But I think focusing on these moments that matter where mistakes are made, I think illuminates some of the right concepts here. So when I was running post-sale at Afresh, This was an AI product. And for those unfamiliar, Afresh is a SaaS company focused on food waste in the grocery space. At its simplest, we're helping produce managers order fresh food every day. How many strawberries, bananas, dates, plums, and juices to order from their distribution center, and with the claim that this product is going to save you millions in food waste reduction by taking our recommendations. When you think about delivering well as a foundation, as this first phase of maturity, I think a lot of professional services leaders today are encountering products and platforms that are requiring buy-in to often increasingly technical concepts. So what was powering this simple idea of order this many cases of 6-ounce clamshells of strawberries was a machine learning model that needed to take into account discounts that were being applied in the store that week. Was it Super Bowl Sunday? What was the weather at the distribution center? Any supply chain changes? Pricing to put out a demand forecast to make this recommendation. I say all this in the sense that what we encountered was that early on, we started winning these pilots to convert customers because there needed to be trust. Prove it to me, you're going to show this outcome. I think professional services leaders are often allergic to the idea of an unpaid pilot sometimes. But when we started to find that we were not converting customers as we expected, we were realizing that the breadth of product market fit needed to be reevaluated. But it was at the time that we started scaling out this methodology and thinking about how to hire and how to really ramp up our go-to-market engine at a time when engineering was still involved in these deployments, whereas we were trying to make it such that geography majors like me, which we also call majoring in disappointing your parents, could be deploying this stuff without engineering help. So I think the idea of clear-headedness around what it takes to deliver well, reliably, needs to happen before you can start thinking about scale. And I think something to keep in mind is that you can think about delivering well across different portions of your delivery obligation too. Oftentimes there's multiple products that we might think about differently, different geographies, different segments of customers. And I think this idea of, are we there with a reliable understanding of how to deliver well before we start thinking about scaling motions is super important.
Yeah, also, you do an extremely competent and great job of thinking through the strategic challenges. We often see PS people because of their history and experience. Although not all of them got to study geography, I admit, but we see that they don't think strategically and they don't interact with their company strategically, right?
Yeah,
and I think that's what causes some of these challenges.
I do think that you're scratching at something there, Dean, which is so important for the branding of professional services leaders within organizations, that this idea that professional services believes that we need to have a 20% margin, that we live and die by maximizing the amount of services that we're providing. Again, this depends upon the type of service we're talking about. We all know that there are outcomes that are differentiated when there's more professional service associated with software outcomes. And so I do want to make sure that's understood. But I do think that sometimes professional services leaders get this brand that we're here to make sure that we're pushing services as much as possible. And I think graduating that to PS leadership that reflects the stage of the company that you are at helps PS leaders engage with finance teams, our partners in sales, support and customer success organizations to reflect more of the reality of what's important to the business, which is a long-term relationship with successful customers.
Yes. So you touched on this earlier, and then we'll come back to the different stages and you kind of explaining what an organization would work on there. And then you were just touching on the strategic alignment component earlier. You said earlier, professional services organizations exist to maximize ARR while not losing money. And we work with lots of PS organizations. So I'm going to push back a little bit on that and ask you to kind of put the category of organization in a box for us as to what organization that makes the most sense for. Maybe you'd argue that it works for all of them, but we kind of see, okay, what is PS's strategic role or charter in the organization, and aligning on that actually is incredibly important. And in some organizations, although few, they're a standalone revenue driver where we're growing, we're having an increasing target, and maybe because our product has entered a commoditized market and we're trying to find new revenue to offset some of the the flattening of the revenue curve there while we build a new product or expand our existing offer so we can be product led again. There are some that become very margin focused, and they have the 20% margin. There's some that are on adoption is PS's primary role. There's some on utilization of our technology. There's some on, right. So there's all these charters, and I don't believe you can actually operate in more than one of those effectively at any given time. And that's part of the point that you're on, which is don't expect us to have a 20% margin, or don't expect yourself to have a 20% margin if your primary goal is to drive ARR for the organization, right? Overall product revenue. So take your statement and maybe just add a little bit of clarity for me on, okay, what kind of organization are we talking about where that statement is applicable? Or, hey, make the case for every organization needs to embrace that PS's role is to drive ARR and don't lose any money along the way.
Sure. Great question. And listen, I've started super broad, and so I'll stay there for just a moment and take it a little bit more specific. Maximizing ARR while not losing money, I think, speaks to specifically the SaaS growth mindset when services are required in order to realize value from the software. And I think that all of those things are not true at every company or every stage of company. When you think about implementation services, I think that investors and CEOs would agree that if we could get our customers live, realizing the outcomes they want, in love with our company without dilutive margin services, we'll do that every time. But I think that for complicated, complex, flexible platforms where customers, as part of the sales cycle, are mapping their own complexity to this view of how a professional services team will help realize value for them on this complicated platform, the idea of not maximizing those services, having them present to realize the outcomes that you need for customers while not losing money, or even losing an adequate amount of money, depending upon the phase of company, is what I'm generally talking about with that statement. Over time, as you start to realize outcomes associated with minimally realizing value, services leaders start to think about packaging value-added services, post-implementation services, services that start to reflect more of a consulting mindset around the value that a software product might be offering. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have consulting firms that might be working on top of software platforms, which truly live and die by their margin and utilization associated with the work that they're doing. It's people's time at the end of the day when we talk about professional services. So I think there's something here too around how your company realizes revenue. Are you a sales-led growth firm where you have negotiations and demos and deal qualification and closing the sale and solutions mapping and implementations teams? Or if you're a services team that's more focused on use case adoption, and which we see a lot now with more API-based or AI-type firms that are really focused on use cases, this new role of a forward deployed engineer, which is kind of born out of Palantir, and we're seeing a lot more, it has a lot to do with adoption. And so thinking about the finances of that type of a services position is a little bit different. But in sales-led growth, you have customers that might be using your platform for free and seeing value. And then how do you turn them into paying customers? Services, in this quote that you have to maximize ARR without losing money, comes with a bit of nuance in the sense that taking customers from realizing value to paying for that value is a different sort of motion than a sales-led growth motion, which is where we typically find more heavy services relationships.
Yeah, I appreciate the tangent and the clarification there. There's the organizational maturity and journey. There's the industry and how that industry or that topic that a particular product or problem set is addressed on, where that is on the maturity curve. And then what we're diving into is for those growth-led PS organizations, SaaS organizations with primarily an upfront implementation optimization services wrapped around it. There's the maturity of that business. And we talked about delivering well. And now I want to go back to where we were, right? The journey we were on, which is on the topic of, or the phase of growth on scaling successfully. So talk a little bit about that. What organizations should focus on there, what they should be aware of and cognizant, and potential pitfalls at that stage.
Pitfalls abound, I think, at this stage. When you're focused on delivering well, you're working on product market fit. really figuring out what it means to provide an implementation or a managed service on top of your product. And when you start to have those reps and start to go from one customer to 5 to 10 to 15 to 50 to 100, you start thinking about the unit economics of what it takes on average to realize value with a customer. This is when you start thinking about, if you're a SaaS company at this stage, potentially raising more money and thinking more quantitatively around the path to cash flow positivity, which comes with the understanding of what it takes to acquire a customer, including the services associated and what it means to expand that customer over time and what that means for the services investments you'd like to make. So what's interesting about this phase of scaling well is organizations that will move 2 steps forward and 1 step back with the anchor, and I won't say hubris, but just like the pressure to move quickly to that scaling phase can come with a quick understanding of where you don't actually have delivering well nailed. I think sometimes this comes with launch of new products to expand your addressable market as a software company. Sometimes you're thinking about partners, and partners come in different forms, right? So I think that usually before you start trying to create businesses or you're trying to create value for large firms around surrounding services with your platform, you start to focus on maybe partners for lower cost of delivery, that the expensive early resources that you're onboarding are now leaders for your organization. And you're thinking about scaled approaches to services, which may mean more junior resources. They might mean offshore resources. And I think that you start to see vulnerabilities in your ability to certify and train others in what you're looking to do well, reliably for customers. You start to see technical vulnerabilities and gaps around what it means to bring outsiders to the table. So partners, again, I think can be a magnifying glass and a forcing function for the vulnerabilities of your organization as you scale. And then I think at this phase 2 is usually when professional services leaders start to have intimate relationships with RevOps teams and FP&A teams to make sure that those models that need to be in place for predictability, so that I can look across a sales plan and then tell our finance team, here's the services that are going to be required to deliver against that sales plan for the activation and the expansion outcomes that we're looking to see, are where you're wrong about these unit assumptions start to magnify with the growth of the organization as it's looking to scale.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point to point out that as you scale, you find out, and you're going to find out things you didn't want to know, but you're also unwilling, unable, because of the business model, to solve it with resources. Right? You can't do what another business might do. A hardware product company can say, well, I'm just going to hire 60 more people and we'll muscle through that. SaaS, because of the way it's valued, which we've talked about, can't do that, right? So you're stuck in this very interesting conversation of, we really can't take on that many. And then, and I sit on a tech board right now, and there's at least one board member that every month says the same thing. I don't care about anything about that at all, bro. Which is, I don't care about reality. Bring on more accounts.
Yeah, there's this. You have to grow up fast at this phase. Oftentimes, and the pressures when you're venture backed are you're working with someone else's money, and a path to those assumptions of what you previously believed was going to get you closer to not needing others' money is always in question. And I think that's a good forcing function. It puts a lot of pressure on teams. But as soon as you understand that acquiring customers of different types on different products comes with different assumptions. If you think you're growing through product-led growth, but it's really sales-led growth, I bet you about 10 points of margin that when it comes to end of quarter, you're going to be about 10 points shy of your targets, depending upon how wrong you are around these assumptions as you scale. You see new customer types, you launch new products, partners are at the table. Macroeconomic factors can change, and the degree to which you need to invest services to realize the same software outcomes can change.
But it gets back to applauding you for being a strategic thinker. And I'm not picking on PS now, I'm picking on the high growth SaaS industry. We don't see enough people sitting down, willing, able, interested, and working through the whiteboard of what did we learn. right? As you said, I did this before and it worked this way, so I'm going to do that, right? Well, that was an early SaaS business model. We're in a later SaaS business model now, right? So yeah, the world has changed, and we're stuck with and also the other problem. And I'm always talking about this, and I apologize. Many executives in SaaS, particularly, aren't trying to build a company, but trying to get a transaction.
I think that that's right. Depending, if you're trying to get a transaction, I think understanding what drives valuations is really important. That can come with the risk of focusing on things a little bit too early, depending upon how much of that short-term win you're looking to get versus long-term sustainable value. And just because you brought it up, Dean, when you talk about like old SaaS and new SaaS, when you look at things like the rule of 40 or now the rule of X, as they're saying, like that can actually add some nuance to how much more important growth is to profitability and services being a part of that profitability picture. Even 4 years ago, depending upon the environment that we're in, coming out of COVID, zero interest rates. And we were seeing in terms of correlation to valuations and these transactions that there was 11 times more weight put on growth than profitability. That's not the case now when it's closer to about 2.5. I think this is also true if you look back to kind of late 2000s, early 2010s SaaS, when the investments that companies were making in the beer and snacks for their early employees are just not what you typically see here, and that you see less new college grads getting hired into professional services, and that we're looking for earlier maturity in professional services businesses, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think being able to focus on the hygiene of your tracking before you actually start to really anchor on the metrics themselves is a good thing. So I do think that there are leaders that have grown up in SaaS professional services that have that outlook. The balance here and this paradox in overcoming it is about really understanding where you do and don't want to be optimizing at any given time, which my wife would tell you is a big problem in my house.
Well, yeah, my wife asked me recently why I don't know when the trash goes out, but we don't really have time to dive into that. But I will tell you, and this is just an example, we probably have, we're the largest training of PS people, right? We own the largest 10,000 people trained. We probably have 50 SaaS companies right now that have bought in psychologically to our training, and it costs almost nothing. Most of them say, I'm either on a transaction journey and I can't ask for $1, or I'm so unimportant, they don't care my people are trained.
This degree to which something is important versus something else gets very interesting as you're going through a transaction. And I think it's different if you are approaching a move to the public markets, if you're anticipating moving into private equity land, where you start to understand the type of theses that are going to come and face your business. Putting that steel box around it's not this or this, it's everything needs to be buttoned up right now is a very acute way to look at short-term optimization and maturity right now, which is very interesting because I think a lot of software companies that are at that phase of approaching a transaction, ironically, are trying to paint the picture for everyone interested in that transaction, whether it's public or private markets, that this is a long-term play, that you're seeing long-term value here, and that software transactions don't happen because of the wonderful professional services profitability that exists. That's a different play. But at the same time, the investments that you can or can't make around investments in services that might benefit that long-term thinking are more difficult to come by, to your point, because it's a steel box around the profile of that company at that time.
Yeah, even though we can mathematically prove that it, as you said, improves ARR and lowers risk. But and everybody buys into it, and that's not the problem. It's helping them communicate a way through that doesn't. Anthony and I just reviewed a company and had to and they're about to go through high growth, and we told them, I said, it's going to break. To your point, you will be very unhappy a year from now, because you're going to have all this negative flow about what you're doing because you're heavily dependent still on making things work as an outcome in the account.
You got to deliver well before you can scale well.
They are the perfect example of it.
Right? It changes over time. Anyway, wonderful discussion. We want to have you back to dive into this even more. Leave us with a couple of takeaways, Justin.
So I think these are all problems that I'm talking about that are difficult to overcome, but I think that there's some tactical ways that you can think about showing leadership as a PS leader through these phases. All of us are very good at predicting rain without building an ark here, but I think the way you start to form those relationships is by focusing on, so what do we do? And I think for the growth phase, just to kind of go back into the ethos of this paradox here, focusing on real mature modeling from pre-sale to post-sale and understanding what goes into that and constantly questioning the accuracy of those assumptions is the right thing to do. Being able to put a slide that we're showing negative 20% margin right now and huddling around the yes, but that's the right investment to make is still good. You want to get that hygiene before it's important. If all of a sudden you need to be profitable, but then you realize that your models and your data aren't going to allow you at that time to pull the levers that you need, it'll be slower. So focusing on that early is really important. I think too, understanding the macroeconomic, but also the individual company phase that you're playing in, the degree to which growth of software and growth of profitability is important, will help you understand where you can and can't make investments at any given time. I think that's really important as well. And I think understanding too that getting to some phase of maturity doesn't mean that you will always be there, and knowing when to pull the parachute on, we're going to be limiting our ability to maintain profitability, for example, if we don't go and fix this problem with our scaling motions, or if we can't scale because this new product is questioning the architecture that will allow us to scale and the assumptions around our partner delivery motion. These are the things that I think PS leaders should be thinking about before they're important, and will allow you to, I think, overcome this idea that, services leaders are just here to sell services, and that you start to reflect more of a leadership around how services is important to the growth of a software company.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great summary, Justin, and I think it's good guidance for. You made it specific there for an organization that was in a certain phase of growth or at a certain stage in their overall company lifecycle and PS lifecycle. But those principles that you shared at the end there, I think are broadly applicable to any professional services leader across. It doesn't matter what industry you serve, right? Whether it's SaaS or whether it's the professional services team for legacy hardware providers or anything in between. Even some pure play consulting organizations ought to go through some of the same kind of mental checks that you just talked through around how do I lead through change, and how do I make sure that I'm thinking strategically about where I want to take this business and what's required to get it there. So I appreciate you sharing that. Appreciate you joining us today and diving into this conversation, and look forward to doing it again soon.
This was fun, Anthony and Dean. Looking forward to our next one. Thanks.
I love the conversation with Justin. He's very articulate and organized on this topic that so many organizations are struggling with. And he calls it the growth paradox for a reason, which is, hey, we feel like we have to get to profitability. Either our organization is putting pressure on us, either we just believe that we need to do something, and we focus on all the wrong things for the stage that we're at in trying to mature as an organization. And so the way he broke it down is, I think he very accurately described the key things you're focused on, but most importantly, the pitfalls that you should be aware of as you go through each of these phases of your PS maturity.
Yeah, I would very much like to continue that discussion. Also, what a cerebral guy. I really enjoy interacting with someone who's so thoughtful. And
yeah, no surprise. We enjoyed somebody that wanted that spent the time organizing their thoughts into a kind of a paradox and a framework like that. And it's just very much our kind of
it's very much our personality. What's the framework? What's the and a key label. We like key labels.
That's right.
Just a super guy. What a great. Everybody should want to get to know him better. So
Yeah, and we were catching up a little bit before and a little bit after. He just presented on this topic at a big conference. We're going to collaborate on some joint studies and analysis on this topic and some of the research and reporting that we're going to do. So there are lots of other ways that if you were interested in what Justin was talking about, to continue to get some access to information through his and our networks as we continue to work together on communicating this and just trying to educate the community on this particular topic. So looking forward to continuing to work together with him there. And if you've seen him recently give a speech on this topic as well, hopefully this added some additional things. I think it did. We went in a couple of different directions. So glad we got to do it. All right. If you enjoyed Justin and this conversation, subscribe on YouTube or your podcast channel so that these things get automatically pushed out to you. That would be much appreciated. If you want to connect with Dean or myself, you can find us on our respective LinkedIn pages, or you can always email the show at podcast@consultantsway.com. Thanks. We'll see you next time.